Hey everybody, Dave Putz here from JKP Holdings. Alongside me, as always, Mr. Nathan Turner.
Morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are.
So it's awesome that we connected for a few minutes. I don't know how things have been up there in Canada. Jersey's been hot this week, man.
Hot.
It's been, yeah, 90s. I think we're 97 today.
Yeah,
unreal.
I just checked. We're actually sitting at 102 with the humidex.
Oh my lord.
It
That is not
hot.
fun. That
It
is not fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Expecting to go up 1 more degree Celsius, so around 103, 104 today. It's hot.
Yeah, the pool's great. I mean, the kids love it,
Yeah.
Last day of summer camp, I'm sure we'll be jumping in a little while. So
Yeah.
I think, we covered some awesome topics. We've had Tom on recently, but, and just, I got a reminder here. Guys, always check out the YouTube channel. We have the reminder bell and all that good stuff, our Facebook group, and things like that. So,
Yeah.
Guys, understand the fact that what we're doing now is awesome stuff, right? Today we're gonna be talking about something that, Nathan, I don't know if necessary is strong enough of a word.
And it's an interesting topic because not a lot of people talk about it. I think it's the kind of thing that everyone just wants to avoid.
Yeah.
Pretend it doesn't exist. But it does exist, and yeah, necessary is not strong enough, and it's necessary. Yeah, it's a must, an absolute must.
So guys, whoever's out there listening right now, I know we got everyone kind of tuning in different channels, our Facebook group and whatnot, but note investing is taught in all different facets by all different people. And one of the topics that's probably at least talked about for numerous reasons, I think, is licenses. Now, this isn't real estate licenses. This isn't licensed to do anything fun. This is simply to own debt. And this is a state by state, sometimes hour by hour change.
And I think one of the reasons we don't talk about it a lot is because it's so different depending on the state. Every state's got different rules and different. It's complicated. So it's not something that a lot of trainers want to get into because it's complicated.
Very true.
And there's a lot of information, and it's a lot to sift through.
Yeah. Sorry about that, guys. So it's an echo craziness, but so I'm glad to see that we're getting into a topic that people need to learn about on a requirement of basic understanding of notes. However, that it's something you need to learn as you move along. I don't think it's the first thing you need to learn about.
No, that's true.
Right.
And we're not trying to scare anybody either. There's an expression in French, tout se fait, and it just means anything's possible.
Yeah.
So it's all, you can do it all, and it's not impossible, but there is a way and a procedure. So not meant to scare anybody, not meant to freak anybody out, but it is stuff that you need to learn about.
And I think for most people, they don't realize the struggles of understanding what can happen if you don't follow the rules. And I think debt license is one of those kind of topics that most people, rumor has it, I'm not sure, or find out when it's too late what the rules are. I shared before, we had somebody where I was talking, we have our investment community, which is a weekly mastermind group. If anyone did, should jump it in. They were talking about joining the group, and they mentioned they bought 2 notes, Illinois and Jersey, and they presumed they would go performing. It didn't. Thought it was no big deal. However, run into the problem was now she's not licensed in Illinois, and she didn't know she had to be. And she wants to start foreclosure. Now what do we do? Shook my head, right? This is just frustrating. Yeah. So today we're bringing on some experts in the space. just make sure you understand that they're unable to answer specific questions about every single state, because that's sometimes an hour by hour change and a lot of information that is not available all the time. So we want to make sure you guys understand we're going to be asking some general questions, but we want to make sure that you understand the basics of it, right? When you need the specifics, answers, questions, how much, what the process is, we need to reach out to Cornerstone and get your licenses through them, right? So I'm letting you guys know that they're going to answer some general questions today. However, once those questions are getting in depth into a deal specific situation, please reach out to Cornerstone and get them set up to help you along the process of getting licensed. So without further ado, Kyle, Christine, well, welcome to our weekly webinar. Can you share a little bit about who you are, what you've been doing, what this whole thing about? Note debt licenses?
Sure, David. It's our pleasure. First of all, thank you for having us on. Christy and I do a lot of work together, certainly on a weekly basis and almost daily basis at this point. And I'm an attorney. I'm physically located in Michigan, licensed to practice and litigate in Michigan and Ohio. But I've been working closely with Cornerstone Support for about a decade now in assisting their clients kind of navigate the landscape of licensing in general. I'll let Christy kind of talk about what the history of Cornerstone is, but my history with Cornerstone is that the landscape of licenses required to purchase debt across all different categories and asset classes has been a constantly changing environment, especially over the last 10 years. So different states have decided to license that never did before. They've decided to enforce their licensing statutes in different ways. And of course, your business that you're talking about has really boomed over the last decade or so. There's a lot more people involved. And because of that, there have been a few potholes that people have stepped in unknowingly. And so I think we can talk today about some of the general things that your viewership needs to be aware of, and then maybe get into a few specifics as we go along. But basically, I've been involved to give legal opinion and kind of guide people from a legal standpoint through this whole process. And Christy's team goes out and gets the job done, and kind of can talk about timing and some of the difficulties in application process and those things too. So Christy, if you want to take it from there.
Thank you, Kyle. Yeah, this is Christy Barger. I've been with Cornerstone for 16 years now. Our company was formed back in '98. Back then, our specialty was standard third-party debt collection, because that's really all anybody talked about. Mm-hmm. As the industry has grown and changed, we have grown as well. And so we do lending licensing, mortgage licensing, accounting licenses, all kinds of different licenses that are needed in our space. So when I have a client reach out to me and they say the words I buy debt, I really tell them we're going to need to talk to an attorney. There's a couple layers of licensing that you have to look at. Some of the state statutes for the debt collection cover the activity of buying debt, saying you need this license if you're a passive debt buyer or an active debt buyer. But then on top of that, the specialty licenses that Kyle was talking about, that's kind of where his expertise comes in. He's able to ask very specific questions of the people and find out exactly their business model. And then he can compare that to the statutes and come back and give a legal assessment, which Kyle said is our marching orders. So we do the paperwork. We're the paper pushers. We help with the filings on the online. A lot of them are on the NMLS, which the system can kind of be a pain. So our girls are trained on how to get through that process. A lot of licenses have surety bonds, and so we've got a department that handles that here at Cornerstone. And then we also have an insurance department, because with this type of activity, you want to make sure you have the proper proper insurance in place to cover you. E&O insurance, just different types of policies that we can write specifically for our industry. So if something happens, unfortunately, you've got some coverage there. So that's kind of where Cornerstone does, and we're a great company, and we've helped a lot of agencies over the years, and we enjoy it.
Amazing.
Good.
So I think some of the chat questions we already got is, let's get back to the basics, right? Debt license is only required, myth, right? When you want to service loans, or when you don't need a license if you have a servicer. We hear that a lot.
Number one myth, I guess, that we hear is as long as you've got a servicer, you're good, right?
No.
What do you mean?
I think I can lend some clarity to that. So here's many of the state statutes say something similar to, let's say, we'll just pick one out. We'll pick out Illinois as a good one because you brought it up, David. And I just brought this up, and again, we don't want to get too deep into state specifics, but in Illinois, it says a person must be licensed to broker, fund, originate, service, or purchase residential mortgage loans. Mm-hmm. So the act of purchasing that loan, and yes, it's subject to a low volume requirement. So if you're under your three loan minimum there, it's not triggered. But the bottom line is, just purchasing the mortgage account triggers a residential mortgage license there in that state. And so here's how these things happen in the past. Clients have come to me and said, we got pinged by this state and I have a cease and desist letter. That's kind of typically how a regulator will start out their enforcement process. Well, what they do is they go to the large servicers and they say, please let me know who all your mortgage companies are that own mortgages that you're servicing in our state. And then the servicers will provide a list of those people. And very simply, the regulator will just bump that list up against who's got licenses. And so everybody who is doing business with a servicer in Illinois, once that regulator comes in and does an audit, but isn't licensed according to the state of Illinois, they're going to know. That reveals it immediately that, okay, we've got these 27 people out there that aren't licensed, but they've got business that they've placed with a servicer. So we know that they own the account. So doing business with the servicer in and of itself can be the source of what exposes you. So it's just important to remember that. And there are many statutes out there that will create that licensing burden, not a debt collection license. These are actually lender licenses falling under the scope of mortgage lender, broker, servicer. And I say those three things because unfortunately, when you kind of let off, you said, all right, we've got 50 states with 50 different rules. Well, and that's true, and they've set up their statutes very differently. Some will licensed lender, broker, servicers all under one statute and one license. Some break out broker and lender into one and a servicer into another one. And then others will break out all three into separate ones. So it's a very different scheme for each state. But I just want to let your viewership know that just the act of owning the loan itself can cause you to need a license. And then as a subset to that, there are other activities that we can talk about that will trigger a license that maybe are within your viewership's ability to decide to do or not do, to outsource or not to outsource. So there are some of those things. Well, I've engaged an agency to do this. I have a foreclosure law firm to do that. All of those things are factors that need to be considered. And that's where the complexity really jumps in.
Gotcha. So is it true that there's some states out there that don't need a license, but you only need a bond? Yes.
So there are some states you don't need a license. Bonding is more of a question for Christy, but honestly, if you don't need a license, here's what I want to say about bonding, and then I'll hand it off to Christy. If you need a license, oftentimes a state will require bonding as part of that license application process.
Yep.
But if you don't need a license, most states contain an exemption to their bonding requirements or certificate of authority requirements for this type of activity. So, and then I'll hand off the bonding question to Christy, because I think that she's got a department really that's far more, that has a lot more expertise than I do in that.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle. So kind of the only states that require bonds only is going to be Texas and New Jersey, and that's under the debt collection statutes. that's going to trigger the need for that bond. Usually they're maybe a $10,000 bond, and you're paying a percentage of that with the states. With the more complex licenses, like the lender and the mortgage, those do have bonding requirements. They're each state. One thing to know is each state is specifically has their own bond. So it's not like you can get one blanket bond. I get asked that a lot. Can I just get one bond for all states? Fortunately, no, because the states actually have their own bond forms. So, someone working nationwide is going to have really a good number of bonds in place for all the different licenses. Maybe even in one state, you're going to have 2 licenses and you're going to have 2 bonds. But that's part of the process that we work with. And as Kyle mentioned, we have a surety a department run by Joel Blackburn here at Cornerstone. He's great, and he can answer any bond questions and helps the process, and gets those bonds over to our team members to submit to the state for our clients.
Awesome. So let me back up a little bit. I think I missed part. Guys, if you're looking to go get insurance or go get bonded or get your license, you can go directly to Cornerstone and get the entire process done with their assistance. They'll make sure you go through all the check boxes and go through the whole process and let you know, do you need it or not need it, by evaluating your situation, right? So they're like the middle person to make sure you need it or don't need it. You can do the homework yourself, but you may need a legalese dictionary with you to make sure you understand what it means. And there's a lot of ambiguity to law. There's a lot of questions out there, right? So.
Yeah, David, that's great. Thank you for saying that. One kind of thing, when you're doing the application, obviously you can do it yourself. Our staff is trained to know the applications. They are assigned certain states, and so they kind of know the nuances or the weirdness. Like, you can't staple some license applications, and that's just the stupidest thing ever. But we have the knowledge, and the girls work closely with the regulators. And like you said, we consider ourselves a one-stop shop. We like to keep everything under one roof and take care of our clients completely.
Yeah. Amazing. I think that most people, A, don't know about this, and B, are lost. Nathan, what's been your experience with people who get involved in this or get lost at this quickly?
It's in so many instances and notes, there will be a question that comes up and then the answer is, well, it depends. And it's the worst answer you want to hear, but it's the most accurate, because it really does depend. If you're talking about one state versus a different state, and a bond versus a servicer license versus a debt collector license versus a lender license, like there's a lot of different factors, and so it's difficult to just say this or that, or there's no blanket statement where you just say yes or no. It's not a just get this and you're fine. It really depends on your specific situation. So it's good to get with professionals that can help navigate that.
And Nathan, usually my conversations, I'm sorry, Kyle, normally my conversations start out with, I just want yes or no, tell me yes or no. And I'm like, no, it's not that simple. If it was, I wouldn't be sitting here. So, I kind of tell them kind of the complexity of it and how, an interest rate might be a trigger, or, first or second mortgage. I mean, there's so many different nuances, and that's where Kyle jumps in, and he knows this and can check statutes, and is amazing to help guide us on the right direction for the clients.
Well, and it's really what we do. It's part of what we do. So, 10 years ago, when we dove into this, the process was a little bit different. I think that things were more simple. They've gotten more complex, but then also it's been a good journey for me to be on with my partners at Cornerstone to really learn what people need. So what we've discovered and been doing for years now is if I provide a legal opinion based on somebody's business model, we always get back on the phone after that to talk through the specific nuances, because I can't know your operations the way you know your operations. Sure. Even if you're small, I can't know what you're going to do on a daily basis. Literally, licensing can come down to what types of conversations are you going to have with the consumer. And so certain states consider that conversation to be loan modification, just having the conversation. So, and loan modification can be a trigger for a broker license. So it's that nuanced. And so you have to have the follow-up conversation once the research is provided, once the general roadmap is provided.
Mhm.
There's a large conversation about, okay, but what are you actually doing and how are you doing it? And you may be able to make some decisions in a state like, hey, on an account in Washington state, I'm not going to do this, because if I do, it's going to be a license. Whereas if I just tell my servicer somehow, hey, you need to have the loan modification conversation, then I don't need a license that I would otherwise need. That may have value to you.
Absolutely.
The other thing that's really important, and I think that I want your viewership to understand, is that both from Cornerstone standpoint and mine, we don't just simply say, you know what, let's err on the side of licensing. Because and that would be kind of an easy cop out, right? Like, there's a license out there, I think you might need it, let's just recommend that you need it. But the problem with that is that the cost of licensing goes far beyond the upfront $700 fee or $1,200 fee. You are opening yourself up to audit from a state. You're opening yourself up to regulator involvement in your business. So this is not a question. There's some downfall or some pitfalls to over licensing as well. You don't want to be under licensed. That creates exposure, obviously, but being over licensed is going to cost you money in the long run, because states follow up. States eventually get to the point where they audit you and they want your records, and it's time, and time is money. So it's a question you want to get right, not necessarily just say, you know, I want to be so safe and get 3 or 4 licenses I don't need either.
Right.
Yeah, and one important thing that I like to make sure everyone knows is this isn't a one and done conversation. So you talked to Colin out today, and then 6 months from now, some laws may have changed, statutes may have changed, states' positions have changed. So this is an ongoing conversation that companies should have. If they go into new states, obviously that's a trigger to have another conversation. If you're changing your business model completely, or if you just want to check in and say, hey, this is what I have. What do I need? And that's something that should be done. It changes every day or every hour, like you said, but it's something you definitely want to look at. We usually suggest once a quarter, or at least once a year, to make sure that you have the proper licenses in place.
For example, recently California enacted some new laws. They'll be going into effect soon. Minnesota. So if you did your homework a year ago and didn't know about these laws, you buy them, you could be caught in a situation. Could you guys give an example of what happens? I'm in a state that requires licensing. What are some of the possibility downfalls of not having my license and own the loan?
Yeah, so and I think the most common scenario for this to come up for us is when people have been doing business and they go to apply for a license that they should have had previously, and they just now realized, okay, I need this license, but on the application, there's a section that says, have you already been doing business? And they've got to answer truthfully and have to say yes. And Christy, I think that you can probably comment about kind of what some of the remediation looks like in those scenarios.
Yeah, we've seen, unfortunately, we've seen fines issued by the states. We've seen it affects other states. So say if you get a disciplinary action in one state, when you upload that into the NMLS, other states can look at it. And so then they may come say, hey, if you're working in Illinois, are you working in Massachusetts? Are you working in New Jersey? So it's not just a one-time issue for you. It follows you, unfortunately, throughout your licensing life.
I will say this, that every single one of the statutes that provides the authority for a regulator to issue a fine or a cease and desist letter or something like that creates a difference between a knowing violation and an unknowing violation. So that's one thing that should put your viewership at ease a little bit, that, if you didn't enter into this with the intent to skirt licensing laws, really the issue becomes, potentially, you could get a fine that's probably not going to be a huge amount of money, but the issue becomes that the regulator wants you to license. They want, if you're coming in and you're saying, hey, I want to be licensed, I want to do this right, I didn't know I needed this. I'm not saying that you're in the principal's office for a moment there, but they want you to come into the fold to be licensed and to kind of remediate that. So they're going to make a pathway for you to do it also. It never makes sense to say, I didn't license already and I'm just finding out that I needed to, therefore I'm going to continue on not being licensed. That's really never. But people have that idea that, gee, if I don't get this, I'm going to be penalized.
Yeah. Or, hey, I didn't get caught yet, so it's okay. Right.
Right.
Yeah. And usually if there's a big issue going on, we always try to connect them with an attorney in the state. You want to go to the state with your hat in your hand, like, and I didn't know there was licensing. I want to do the right thing now. And so that helps with those situations too, is to, get somebody can act on your behalf in a legal way and hopefully get that fine or lowered or maybe gone for completely.
I think we're coming to the end of it now, but you probably could still right now write a letter saying, I wanted to do this, but COVID.
Yeah.
I've had that work for a couple of clients over the last year. Right. Exactly.
So you mentioned before, sometimes just the servicer having a servicer and the regulator will come do an audit, and that can be the trigger for you kind of being brought out in the open. What are some of the other triggers that can kind of put you on the radar?
Well, I would say the most common one is a complaint from a consumer, or a consumer just simply saying, who is this person that bought my note? I'm talking to them, and a lot of people, they're pretty savvy. They'll look up and see if you're licensed. Those things are public record, and if you're not, they'll contact the whatever office in the particular state that's regulating that. That's probably, aside from the regulator servicer audit, that's far and away the most common way.
And I presume defendants, the borrowers, attorneys can find this out and then hold up in foreclosure court the same issues.
Absolutely. Absolutely true. Now, under, not so much in the mortgage laws, but in other areas of debt buying, other asset classes, there are statutes that indicate that, you either can't collect at all or you can't collect the interest and things like that. So it's very state specific, not so much in the mortgage space, but, I don't know if some of your viewership potentially is buying other types of accounts as well. So that's kind of where that lands. But, the bottom line is these things are not secret. People can look up whether or not you're licensed. And so it's pretty discoverable.
Yeah. Nathan, I'll let you feel some of the questions that are coming in as well.
Yeah, I had one other as well.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So let's go pick on Illinois again, just since we're there. But I'm not a huge fan of Illinois, but
I don't think many of us are.
We're already there, so that's fine. So my question was, what is it? Just mortgage debt that needs licensing, or like, what if I've got a contract for deed? Or is that again state specific?
Well, it is state specific, but the thing to remember in Illinois is that here, and again, here's the language: are you purchasing a residential mortgage loan? So I would say if you're purchasing the obligation for the consumer to pay you on a contract that's secured by real estate, it would fall within that definition. Now, the nice thing in Illinois, and this also happens, I think Christy alluded to it earlier, and this is one of the reasons why it's important to get a legal assessment, I think, is because certain elements of the licensing process will exempt you from other parts of it. There's a number of states where that's true. Illinois is one of those. So if you get your Residential Mortgage Licensing Act license in Illinois, licensees under that act are exempt from the collection agency licensing in Illinois. So you really only need one license there. That's not always true, but it is true in a number of states. So again, you get into specifics, but getting the right license can mean you only have to license once.
And I think that answers the question. Some of the questions we've had is like, name the top 3 states that you have to be licensed in. And the question is, well, what are you doing, right? Are you using a servicer? Are you using a servicer? Because that changes. If you're using a servicer, there's certain states that don't require you to have a license if you have a licensed servicer handling your everyday interaction with the borrower. right?
Absolutely.
So if you're talking about self-servicing, now we open a whole new can of worms of I'm self-servicing alone. You need to get different licenses based on that scenario.
But here's the thing. So when we talk to people, I don't let them say, I've outsourced my servicing or I'm self-servicing, because people mean different things when they use that word. They're not necessarily using the legal definition. So really, I don't even want to know what you think you're doing. I want you to lay out the specifics of what tasks are you undertaking and how are you doing those things, and then we'll kind of funnel that into the definitions and the statutes so that we can figure out a plan. That's the way we go.
That's huge. That's very, very big. That's something I reluctantly, I think I made Christy on a conversation, like, I just need to know. And the problem is verbiage that we use can be translated to different things, right? I do everything with servicers. Well, do you do everything with servicer, or do you mail a letter to your borrower? Well, I do mail. Yeah, they handle everything but, right? Nathan sent a demand letter. He handles that part. Now, is it triggering anything by doing demand letter where a servicer does everything else? So, absolutely.
Right. And oftentimes people will say back to us, well, should I not be doing that? And the truth is that there's no wrong answer. There's no right answer to what you should be doing. I just need to know what you are doing.
Yeah.
And then we can identify for you, if you think that's a part of your process you can take out in order to avoid some licensing, then fine. But those are that's your internal decision to make. All we can do is kind of lay out the landscape, lay out the variables, and then, you pick and choose what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Okay. We've got some questions that came in here. We've got, I may not get to all these, but let's see what we get here. So Joshua Scott's asking, when you start a foreclosure, shouldn't your attorney be helping with this, making sure that you're compliant before you start filing?
Sure. I can't speak to what an attorney, is going to do with regard to your licensing, and they may not be an expert in licensing. And
they probably aren't, in fact.
They probably aren't. You have to really, really, have almost no social life whatsoever. Involved in this stuff.
Good answering it. So yeah, I agree. Nathan asked that question, basically from Josh's point of view, but your attorney is there to do the legal process to foreclose on that asset. Their job is to know the law of what can be foreclosable and what can't. Your business and what you do, your business, and your licensing your business is not involved with the foreclosure process. They don't check to make sure you're licensed, because they just want to make sure that collateral file is foreclosable. That's a word, right? Legally able to foreclose on. The side of the fact you collecting debt is not in their world. They just want the numbers from that. So yeah.
So they probably don't know if you are or need to be. That's not part of their expertise.
Some will say, I think so. We've asked many attorneys, hey, what do you know about Georgia, right? Because Georgia has a law that I believe it's 5 or under your personal name, blah, blah, blah. And we've asked our foreclosure attorney, like, I don't know, that's not their expertise. So we get them confused a lot of times and think that because they know foreclosure, we have to know the lending licensing laws, and they don't.
Yeah, and actually, Cody's got a question kind of along those lines about kind of exemptions per state. Like, for example, Georgia, where if you have less than, and this is the number that I've heard all kinds of numbers, less than 5, less than 3. I've heard none. There is no exemption. So again, I imagine that's state specific. Any comments on that?
It's very state specific. Some don't have any low volume exemption at all. So, and I think why you've heard different numbers at different times is Georgia's a little bit unique because the language there seems to confine the low volume exemption to an individual and doesn't make it available to a corporate entity. That's unique. Most of the statutes that have a low volume exemption don't talk about it in that way, but it's just very state specific. And usually it's somewhere between 3 and 5. Others also will allow it to be between 3 and 5 annually, or 3 and 5 in any 12-month period. So, if you can stack up your 12-month periods, you may be able to accumulate some loans there without licensing.
I just want to clarify what you said there for those listening. When they say individual, meaning in your personal name, right? There's always questions about being an IRA name versus personal name. Like, can IRA be supplemental for your personal name? But when you cannot put into your company name, LLC or entity, you can, from what we're understanding, is put loans, be exempt from the licensing in Georgia if it's in your personal name. Just like you created it and you did your own thing. That's the idea of it. We've heard 5, we've heard 3, like you said, but the personal name is the key there from what we understand.
David, I agree with that. Here's the thing. So if I put on my corporate advisor hat, I would tell people the potential liability in the consumer lending space these days would make it absolutely a terrible recommendation on my part to put a note in your personal name. I just think that, Christy, you can talk about what licenses generally cost, but I mean, you're talking about a license that costs $1,000 or something in that range, I would imagine. And to expose your personal assets to liability is not a good decision in this space, not in the environment we live in today. So,
and before Christy jumps in there, is that an annual cost or a one-time fee?
So with the licensing, there's an initial cost to get it in place. It's usually a little more expensive initially because the state has to do a lot of background checking and vetting of the company. They do renew every year. So there's some type of filing that has to be done. Sometimes there's supplemental filings, like there may be a license annual report or a mortgage call report. Again, each state's different with what they require, but they all do renew. They're not one and done licenses.
Gotcha.
Okay.
And I guess the annual cost is usually a lot less than the initial amount.
It can be. Some of the states do have a smaller filing fee for the renewal. Other states have the same when you initially get it. And then you've got that bond fee if the state has a bonding requirement. You also have that renews every year. So that's additional fees that are paid.
So Victor Wagner's got a couple questions in here. This first one I think we've covered already, but he's asking, is there such thing as like if you buy a license in one state, does that carry over into another state? I think we've already covered that. The answer is no.
Yeah, I think that's a hard no.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a yes or no question.
Right. Yeah. That's not it depends. That's a no.
And then the second one here, I'll just read it how he's got it written because I'm not quite sure what he's asking. He says, does any state require a licensee to report unlicensed entities as a condition of maintaining the license?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I can write out Nathan and say, Nathan is not licensed, because Georgia requires me to let them know if I know, like insurance, I guess, like, someone's robbing insurance companies, report the bad, I think that's the angle.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And one thing too is I know we're all friends in the industry and people talk to each other. Don't get the license that your buddy has. That may not be what you need. I have a lot of conversations about that. Well, so-and-so has this license, so just give me these. No, that may not cover you.
We like to be quick and easy, right? We just want to get past it.
Yeah, I wish it was that simple, but it's not.
And then Chrissy, can you give us an idea? We talked about it briefly, but like when you say setup fees versus annual fees and things, like what kind of range are we looking at? Like, is it like Kyle mentioned, like about $1,000, or is it more like 5,000 or?
Yeah, I mean, there's thousands, kind of a good average, I would think. There are some that have really high filing fees. I've seen $10,000 filing fees in a couple of states. So It really just depends on the license that's being applied for. Again, at renewal time, it's usually a little bit less. I kind of like to give a 60-40 range of how much it reduces. But that's not every state, but that's a good bit of them.
Who's charging $10,000?
Oh, and here's what really gets you too, the bond amounts. So for the collection agency license,
a little bit. Explain the bond situation a little bit.
Yeah, so the collection agency licenses may require a $10,000 bond. It's pretty simple. Some of these mortgage licenses, you start out at a minimum. It may be $20,000, $50,000, $100,000, $500,000. But as you do your business, you're reporting loan balances and work done, and that can affect the amount your bond has to be filed for. So at renewal time, you're increasing your bond, which is going to increase your filing fee or your bond premiums each year as well, essentially.
Mhm.
And obviously, you
So-
want them to go up because you're doing more work, but it's going to cost you.
So for a $10,000 bond, am I handing over $10,000?
No. So I like to explain it kind of as like an insurance policy. So think of a premium. A $10,000 bond, I would say probably is going to cost you around $150 a year, but it is a yearly fee.
Yeah, we've had that question a lot. 10 grand, that's a lot to put up. It's not that you're putting up 10 grand. It's that you're buying a bigger package. When you buy a term life insurance policy for $1 million, you're not putting up $1 million.
Right. Right. And it does, the bonding amount does rely, it's based on your financials of your company. So if you're a new startup company, you may have to go to what we call high risk. It's not saying you can't get a bond, you just may have to pay a little bit more for it.
Like car insurance.
It is.
Like
And so
car
that's, yeah, exactly. And, we try to get the best price available, and we watch the bonds for our clients and keep them as cheap as possible. But they do change.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Victor's got one other question here.
Yeah.
He says, are you aware of any state enforcement actions against an self-directed IRA or 401k plan as an unlicensed lender?
I am aware of, when he says enforcement action, let's just say that there are lots of different layers or manifestations of that. So what doesn't normally happen is on smaller players like this, the enforcement action generally does not come in the form of a lawsuit or something like that. The state attorney general is not getting involved in that way. What will happen is you'll get a letter. You'll get a letter from the regulators saying, we have information that you're doing business unlicensed, and they'll ask some questions. Are you doing this business? And that's how it will start. And then they're really trying to get to the point of, did you do something that they think they're going to issue a fine? Are they going to issue a cease and desist letter? Those kinds of things. And then you'll have an opportunity to remediate. So I would describe that as an enforcement action. That's action being taken by the regulator enforcing the laws. But it maybe is taking on a little bit different connotation than there's an enforcement action like what we see potentially coming from the CFPB against collectors or lenders in the consumer space that are large players. Okay, so that's kind of how I would describe it normally happening.
So there's no real straight protection. If I say, listen, I'm not going to put any loans in my company name. I'm not going to put loans in my personal name. I'll be using my self-direct to protect me. Self-direct IRAs are not protected and still need to become licensed, correct?
Correct, right. So whoever owns the loan, whatever that entity is, whether it's you as a human being or an LLC or a regular C Corp or whatever, that entity needs to obtain a license in various states based on various activities.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Ms.
you want
Reed,
that LLC or the incorporation there. You don't want to go license, Christy Barger.
Right.
So one of the questions was a good question. If it says, like, if you're a scenario where you didn't get licensed and you learn about the license requirements and you get licensed and then you possibly got fined because you didn't do what you're supposed to do, would this pose a problem when you go to get the license then? Or it's like, you got fined, we'll still accept your license? Or they hold you off and say, well, because you failed to let us know before, you won't be able to get your license?
Yeah, I haven't seen that. I mean, it does happen where you're reporting unlicensed activity. I've never seen a state say, it's too bad, we don't want you in our state now.
Because it says something that it's the violation can be visual in the NMLS.
So the NMLS system is what the mortgage space kind of uses for a consolidated place for their licenses. Over the years, the collection industry's kind of jumped on it. So a lot of the collection agency licenses are on there now. So when you upload a document to, say you're filing for a Connecticut license and you're uploading a document, any other state could look at that. Now, I don't think states just go out and say, hey, let's go try to find somebody who's got in trouble. I mean, they might, but but it is on the NMLS, and it can be seen by other states, licensing boards.
Cool. One of the questions we have here is, are you guys attending any kind of conferences? I know the conferences are kind of ramping up now.
Yeah, Cornerstone goes to several a year. We kind of look at the first of the year and see what's coming up. Obviously, we're always at ACA and RMAI. Those are some of the standard conferences we go to. We have been to a couple of the mortgage conferences. So always looking to go to, if there's a good one about that we need to go, let me know. So we do stay on top of those and try to go as often as we can.
I would say the same for me. And just so you are aware, I'm not an employee of Cornerstone. I'm an independent attorney. One of the things that we do in issuing legal opinion for people is advise them that the opinion is between myself and them. Their obligation or desire to share it with Cornerstone is really up to them. And the reason that that's important is because I then have attorney-client privilege with them. So the things that they would tell me and divulge, if we keep Cornerstone out of that portion of the conversation, are still privileged. And then we can share the research with them, and all of us can kind of collaborate after that. But to that end, I've been at many conferences with Christy or people on her team, and so very often we're together in those things.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's some note conferences coming up this fall that might be.
Yeah, and I think that most people don't know what the conferences you mentioned before. They're not the typical note conferences that we're all aware of, right? We have a couple coming up here. Nathan and I will both be speaking at, but not. Those conferences are typically not what Cornerstone's going to, but we'll share with them that the DME that's coming up in September, and then Note Expo and Paper Source and whatnot. It'd be great to see them out there, but understand that they're a different level typically. The level conferences they were speaking about before are more a higher level than the typical ones we're all accustomed to. Where we're focusing on the note side stuff, the side of servicing and licensing is a little bit grayer. Servicing is involved with us, but licensing is a little bit different. That's all about regulations and whatnot, regulators and whatnot. So I'm just trying to grab some more questions as they come in here for the different feeds, everything else. So.
Look, Guido, I haven't talked to Guido for a long time. Good to see you, Guido. Well, kind of. Sort of see you. He says, if I sign a purchase and sale agreement for a note in a new state that I didn't do business in before, do I get licensed before signing the sale, like before closing, basically? Like,
well,
would they have to get that license before they completed the sale?
Not necessarily, but I guess here's the issue there. Is that before you take any action, it potentially is going to hold up you taking action. So, Christy, what would you say? I know you hate this question, but I love putting you on the spot. What would you say the general timeline is to get, a mortgage broker, servicer, lender license?
You're probably looking at about 3 to 6 months, again, depending on the state. Some of them have, fingerprinting, which that takes extra time to process. I don't really think the states are behind because of COVID. They've done a really good job, staying up to date on their stuff. But 3 to 6 months is the dates I normally drop when I'm talking to someone about processing times. And there's no expediting because that's always asked. I wish there was, but the states, it's kind of first come first serve. The sooner you file it, the sooner you get approved.
To answer Guido's question, it is probably something he wants to know in advance, right? So if I'm moving into a new state, number one, do I need to be licensed there? Number two, what is my 3 to 6 months how is that gonna impact my business plan here? So you may be able to sign a letter of intent or understand that you're going to close on this note at a certain point in time in the future and be able to initiate the process of getting your license in place earlier to reduce that exposure there. Because again, obviously time is money, and you want to jump in and get the low-hanging fruit and get the thing back to performing or whatever you're going to do.
Yeah, I think Stephen Burke's got a question here about consultations with Cornerstone. Is there a cost associated with the consultation?
So there's not. So if someone called in and was asking me questions, I would answer obviously the best of my ability. When we started needing Kyle, we reach out to him. We jump on a call for the three of us, and there's no cost for that consultation. Kyle, I'll kind of let you explain where it takes it from there because that's where you drop me off. But no charge to talk to me and no charge to talk to Kyle initially.
Yeah, and then I would jump in with somebody once they've given me a description of, I mean, the typical conversation is, hey, what made you place this call in the first place? Are you moving into a new line of business? Is there a different geography going on? Are you just, did something happen where you became aware of a license? Whatever the reason is. And then we ask people to describe what we were talking about earlier, the exact tasks that they're undertaking, where they're doing it from. And how they're going about their business. And then what I do is normally follow up that kind of an initial call with a proposal to say, hey, look, this is the research I think you're asking for. This is the amount of time and effort it would take me to put into it. This is what I charge for that. Please let me know if you want me to go forward with it. So then I don't do anything unless I get the green light from them. And that all happens between myself and them individually. Again, Christy just mentioned she gets kind of kicked off the call then at that point. And then once I provide the research back to them, that's when we schedule the follow-up call to talk through the nuances and things like that. And then again, it's up to the note owner to decide whether or not to engage Cornerstone for all or part of what I've recommended, and then there's more collaboration after that point. But there is that moment kind of in between where it's just me as the attorney, the client is the client, having that kind of private conversation about what they're going to do.
Gotcha.
Got this question here from Love Mackenzie. I've got a follow-up to your question, Mackenzie. Are you saying that I have to have a license to sell notes? So I would actually go back to Mackenzie and say, well, do you own them or not? Are you brokering them, or are you owning them and then selling them? So
well, right, but there are at least a couple of states that do have language in their statute that indicates that you need a license to sell notes. Now, again, Nathan, your question is right on point. If you own them, you may have needed a license just to own them before anyway. And then there's the question about, okay, I'm selling these notes, but I'm brokering it, so I'm not in the chain of title. And that is another nuance that could affect licensing in every single state. So that's a very, very specific question that would need to be evaluated under the statutes of every state.
Yeah. So I want to make sure everyone knows I just posted the form. If you want to get their information, what we're going to do is we have a form together. You just put the information in there, and I'll share with Kyle and Christy your information so they can follow up with you, but you also can follow up with them, and I'll share their information as we get along with it. So I think that's a big thing for me for brokering notes. We hear a lot of people get in this space and say, hey, I've wholesaled properties. I've bird dogged before. I've gotten out there and looked at houses and I just get my assignment fee and move on. What they don't realize is notes is not like brick and mortar real estate, that you can't just go and grab a note and sell it to a person in certain states. You need to have a broker's license in certain states. You can get fined, you can be regulated, you can be in trouble for just trying to make a couple dollars. So you need to make sure that what you're doing. Now, I'm saying is if you're in a situation where you're brokering a note and you're connecting to people, whatnot, it may not be a situation, but if you're truly trying to broker, you can get yourself into some big trouble. So be careful with that stuff. Brokering is a dangerous space. In our note space, a lot of people swear that they're direct to the seller. We talked about that before. You may not be direct to anybody, but another broker who says it's a seller or whatever, or whatnot. So I'm glad you asked that question. Love, I appreciate you jumping in there, and we'll definitely, respond to your other question later. She said she's a real estate broker. Unfortunately, real estate broker and notes are completely different world. Can you real estate broker in a state without having a license? Nope. Same thing with notes, but it's a different test. It's not the same angle. So I appreciate you jumping in there and asking questions. I think for me, with licenses, there's so many nuances with notes that license is another icing on the cake, and there's another cherry. It's like another thing to learn, right? We learned about, statute of limitation. You learn about the fact of, is a paper foreclosable or not? Now licenses. Is it hard for a newer investor to get into this space with all these regulations? What's your opinion on that? How are new people who are overwhelmed with this? How do you encourage them to get involved, feel safe, feel smart about what they're doing without having this worry of, oh my God, I'm violating some kind of big lawsuit coming?
And they're just looking at buying like less than 5 notes total to get started. 1, 2, 3 notes.
I mean, I think the most important thing is to get the information beforehand. You can deal with it. You can deal with anything if you know the environment you're in. So you can, if you've got a geographical scope, you can ask me for what's the guidance in these states. What do we think we need? I mean, the thing is that is interesting about it is that you're probably more likely to be able to buy notes in the population centers. So maybe you start there, or maybe you start locally with your own state that you're located in, or maybe you just have an opportunity to buy in a certain state that's across the country. But I mean, I think that those are the questions that need to be answered up front, so that it's always easier to deal with what you know than the unknown, because the unknown is this monster out there that can attack you. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people are afraid of that because of, I don't want to spend $5,000 to buy a $10,000 note. And we get that a lot, right? I just want to test it out. But the problem is that you may be in a situation where you're trying to foreclose and you can't because you're not licensed. You need to start through the process. And most of the time people are, in a world where it's easier to just do it. And unfortunately, that's not always true. Okay. So before we turn off, I think for me, my question, Nathan, is this process of getting into licensing and whatnot. Is it something that you find, what are the biggest issues that most people who come to you struggle with? Where's the number one question or hurdle that people need to get to learn or understand?
So kind of on the licensing side, it's initially is, what do I need? Again, it goes back to that my buddy has this, so I just need to get this.
Yeah.
Probably not true, or possibly not true. So that's where, Kyle jumps in and he's able to ask those questions. And I've been on calls with them where, we were going along very smoothly, and then all of a sudden somebody would ask a question, it would be answered some way, and he'd be like, okay, wait a minute, let's go back and talk about this. So that, and then once we know what we need, I think the biggest licensing is maybe some of the documents, the supplemental documents that go with the application. I don't have a business plan. I don't have a method of operations. And that's something Kyle can help with too, kind of on the attorney side for us to use on the application submission.
Yeah, just to kind of elaborate on what Christy just said there, the regulators' offices are set up to handle these licenses in a way that most typically occurs for them. So they're not thinking in their application process, when they set that up, they're not thinking of this aftermarket purchase kind of scenario. Yeah. This happens outside of the mortgage space too. So oftentimes the applications are set up to deal with your typical, non-depository lender who's actually funding loans, and some of the requirements are set up that way. And so we oftentimes get into conversations with regulators saying, well, no, I don't have a truth in lending policy because I'm not actually lending, but your statute is requiring me to be licensed. And so there's some back and forth that has to happen. Unfortunately, it falls on the folks at Cornerstone a lot to kind of be the intermediary in those conversations. And there's a lot of documentation that has to be provided. But the issue is this too, that people need to understand, is that just because you get somebody who's sitting in a cubicle in the Department of Finance office within a state that says, well, you're not funding a loan, so you're not fitting into our application process, that's not binding on a consumer that files a complaint, or a consumer that sues you, or on a judge that says, well, statute clearly says your activity needed to be licensed. So there's that push and pull there. We do get into that, hey, Kyle, why did you recommend this license? The regulator says that, I've got to have a truth in lending policy, and I'm not a lender, and they know I'm not a lender. So there's some things that have to be worked through in the process. That's all I'm saying.
You mean regulators are making minimum wage kind of money and don't know all this stuff? It's amazing, right?
But some of them do. When you talk to them, some of them are super knowledgeable, and we'll talk. And so, you just never know what you're going to get in any particular state.
Kyle, I'm so glad you brought that up. I'd actually just wrote that down of, you can call the state and get 5 different answers. So thank you for bringing that up.
Like any government agency, any government call, it's always the same. So
real quick, before I jump in here, is Love followed up with a question here: is if a private lender is selling a note to a private company, is it okay to buy? Love, as they said before, A, it depends on the state. That's a big one. And B, if it's in a state that requires you have licensing, you can buy the note as long as you're licensed in that state to buy it, if that state requires it. So it's not the matter of who buys and sells it. It's the entity buying it. What is the situation with the entity? Is it an entity that needs to be licensed or not? And what are you going to be doing as a lender when you buy the note? What are you going to do? What's your business model? Hopefully that answers your question.
Yep. So then we're always trying to look down the road and see what's coming and things like that. I'm curious from a regulator standpoint, we're all kind of anticipating maybe not a flood, but an increase in non-performing notes coming up. Are you expecting the same kind of thing, and what kind of impact would that have on licensing?
And this doesn't have to be from an attorney point of view, just more of a human point of view. What are you seeing? What you're feeling?
Well, I am an attorney, so I'm subhuman by definition. I think that makes a lot of logical sense. I don't know if there are more relief packages or regulations that are going to come out that are going to prevent people from defaulting loans. Who knows? Things have happened over the last year or two that I don't think any of us could have anticipated. So, but it does make logical sense that there's going to be more notes out there to buy. Now, what we're seeing right now, Christy, you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, but what we're seeing right now is a lot of states are starting to get into agency licensing that they didn't have before, and these newer statutes are very aware of these secondary markets in a way that's different from licensing changes that happened 10 years ago. So California is a good example, right? So they're capturing all debt buyers within the language of their collection agency licensing. Other areas of focus are medical debt and student loans. So that's not affecting your viewership here, but those are areas of real focus that we're seeing a lot of regulation come in. But as defaults increase, wouldn't surprise me if there's additional regulations that we just don't know what they are. I can't tell you that there's a pending House bill or that there are pending bills in any states right now that I'm aware of, but I don't think it's reasonable to make an argument that no, we see this regulation going away or reducing. I think it's only trending in one direction.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Awesome. Well, guys, again, I'm going to post it. If you have any questions or concerns, you want to follow up, feel free to fill out the form that we posted into the chat. And also, feel free to ask a question in there. If there's something specific you want to learn, this will go back to Christy and Kyle, and they can set up a time to talk to you. I think they well clarified for everyone, this is a space that it's not a yes/no on licenses, right? I went into today hoping that they would say, well, there's certain states where it's absolutely no, or absolutely. And I'm learning quickly, unfortunately, that it's not always that crystal clear, and why. And I think that was well presented today. I appreciate you guys coming in.
Yeah, that's very good. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we all say, we do this every week. We do a webinar every week in our Facebook group. Feel free to tune into it. It'll be posted on YouTube and our Facebook group, as well as our website and all that stuff. Always tune in, ask questions. There's never a stupid question, but I appreciate everyone jumping in today. And from here, we're going to disconnect from everybody and hope everyone has an awesome weekend and enjoy.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank
Thank you.
you.